Don't make this harder than it has to be. Mom, my daughter said, as she placed a cardboard box on the narrow bed. The house is gone. For a moment, the only sound in that room was rain tapping against the window of Silver Pine's residence. Soft and polite, as if even the weather knew not to interrupt a betrayal. My son stood near the door, with his hands in his jacket pockets, avoiding my eyes the way he used to avoid the kitchen after breaking something as a boy. Inside the box were the leftovers of my life, my wedding photograph, my husband's wool cardigan, the chipped blue mug he drank coffee from every morning, and a folded quilt my mother had made before arthritis stole her fingers. Marissa looked at them like clutter. Grant looked at them like evidence. I looked at them and understood that my children had not brought me here to rest. They had brought me here to disappear. They called it a temporary arrangement at first. That was how they got me into the car that morning. By wrapping cruelty in soft words. Marissa said I seemed tired. Grant said winter was coming and the cliff roads were dangerous. My daughter-in-law, who had not visited me in 8 months, suddenly worried about whether I was remembering to take my blood pressure medication. They smiled too much. They touched my shoulder too gently. They spoke slowly, as if I had become a chair. They were deciding where to store. I knew something was wrong when Marissa would not let me lock the back door myself. She said she had already done it. But I had heard the drawer open in the hallway, the drawer where I kept the brass key to the pantry, the spare checkbook, and the old leather address book filled with names they never cared to know. Silver Pines did not smell like pine. It smelled like lemon cleaner, boiled vegetables, and loneliness hidden under expensive carpet. The lobby had a stone fireplace no one used and a grand piano no one played. A smiling woman at the front desk greeted me by name before I told her who I was, which meant Marissa had arranged everything long before that morning. We're so happy to welcome you, Mrs. Whittaker, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Welcome was a strange word for a locked door. I noticed the label on the folder, long-term residential intake. Not respite care. Not 2-week observation. Long-term. My fingers went cold, but I did not ask questions. A woman who has spent 39 years as a hospice nurse learns the value of silence. People reveal more when they think you are too weak to understand them. Grant signed where the receptionist pointed. Marissa initialed pages without reading them, because she had probably read them twice already. They asked me to sign, too. And when I hesitated, Marissa gave that thin, public smile she used at charity luncheons. Mom, please, this is just standard paperwork. Don't embarrasseuse. Embarrasseuse. Not scare us. Not worry us. Embarrasseuse. I looked at my daughter, at the pearl earrings I had given her when she graduated from college, at the manicure she could afford, while telling me the house had become a burden, and I felt something inside me loosen, not break, loosen. It was the final knot of hope coming undone. I signed the medical consent page, but left the financial authorization blank. Marissa's smile twitched, and Grant finally looked up from his phone. The room they gave me was on the 2nd floor, facing the parking lot instead of the gardens shown in the brochure. There was one bed, one chair, one dresser, and a framed print of a lighthouse that had never seen a real storm. Marissa opened the curtains and said, "See, it's bright." Grant set my suitcase beside the dresser and muttered, "Better than being alone in that old place." That old place was the cottage their father had rebuilt with his own hands after the mill closed. That old place was where I sat up through their fevers, where I measured their heights on the pantry doorframe, where I buried our golden retriever beneath the hydrangeas, because Grant cried too hard to hold the shovel. But to them, it had become square footage, ocean frontage, money trapped in wood and stone. I ran my palm over the bedspread and said nothing. Then Marissa put the cardboard box down. She did it with the brisk finality of someone delivering donations to a thrift store. We kept what mattered, she said. The rest was too much to move. My husband's cardigan was folded badly. One sleeve twisted underneath. I reached for it and pressed the wool between my fingers. It still carried the faint smell of cedar from the trunk at the foot of our bed. "Where is the trunk?" I asked. Grant shifted his weight. Marissa answered too quickly. "Storage." I knew that tone. Storage meant sold, thrown away, or sitting in her garage until she decided whether it matched her coastal modern decor. She kept talking, filling the room with practical words: maintenance, taxes, safety, market timing, care expenses. She never once said grief. She never once said home. When she finally said the house had been sold, she watched my face the way a buyer watches a crack in the ceiling. Grant looked relieved, almost excited, as if the worst part was over, because the old woman had not screamed. It was for the best. He said, "You couldn't keep rattling around there forever." Rattling around. That was what he called the life I had built after his father died. The garden I weeded every spring. The porch I painted every July. The kitchen where I baked his favorite apple cake long after he stopped coming for dinner. I wanted to ask, when my children had begun speaking about me as if I were already dead. Instead, I placed the cardigan back in the box and looked at them both. My voice came out calm enough to surprise even me. "Did you at least get a good price?" Marissa blinked. Grant gave a short laugh. "The kind men use when they think they have escaped consequences." "That's what you're worried about?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap to keep him from seeing they were not shaking. Marissa softened her voice, which meant she was about to lie. "We did fine. Mom, Daniel Price made a generous offer. And honestly, we were lucky. A property like that needs major updates. The roof, the seawall, the old wiring." She listed problems as if she had not grown up under that roof, as if her father had not spent 2 summers repairing that seawall stone by stone while she ran barefoot along the tide pools. I nodded once, and the papers I asked. Everything was handled properly this time. Grant answered, "Yes. Stop worrying. You're taken care of." But his eyes slid away again. And that told me more than any confession. Before they left, Marissa kissed my cheek without touching my skin. Grant gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. They promised to visit on Sunday, though none of us believed it. At the door, Marissa turned back and said, "Try to settle in. Mom, fighting this will only make things harder." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because she still thought the fight was beginning now. She did not know it had begun 6 months earlier. On a foggy Tuesday night, when I heard Grant in my kitchen whispering into his phone, "We just need to get her declared incompetent before she changes the will." She did not know I had called Victor Hale the next morning. She did not know the house she thought she had sold no longer belonged to the mother she had underestimated. After the door closed, I sat alone in that expensive little room, and listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway. A woman began crying somewhere nearby. A thin, tired sound that rose and fell like wind under a door. I lifted my wedding photograph from the box. In it, Thomas was laughing, his hand at my waist, his hair blown wild by the same ocean wind that had battered our cottage for 42 years. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I was not sure whether I was apologizing for our children or for waiting so long to admit what they had become. Then I opened the blue mug, slipped my fingers inside, and touched the folded paper hidden beneath the tissue. Victor had told me to keep one copy close. Harbor, Lily Holdings. Transfer recorded. Irrevocable trust established. My children had locked me away and sold my house. They just hadn't realized I had already sold it to myself. Sunday came and went, without Marissa or Grant. I knew it would. Silver Pines served baked chicken at noon and called it a family-style lunch. And though most of the residents ate in silence, while visitors bent over their phones and grandchildren counted minutes until they could leave, I sat by the window with my untouched plate and watched the parking lot shimmer under a weak winter sun. Every time a silver SUV turned in, I felt my heart betray me with one small, stupid lift. Then the car would pass, or stop for someone else, and I would lower my eyes before anyone noticed. That was the humiliating part of being a mother. Even after your children turned you into paperwork, your body remembered the sound of their voices as something beloved. By 3 o'clock, I stopped looking outside. By 5, the receptionist sent up a message that Marissa had called and said something had come up. Something had come up. That phrase became the theme of my first 2 weeks at Silver Pines. Marissa missed Sunday because of a client emergency. Grant missed Tuesday because his gym had a plumbing issue. The following Friday, both of them were supposedly too overwhelmed to visit. Though Marissa found time to send me a text with 3 heart emojis and a reminder to be nice to the staff, I did not answer. My phone, however, became a problem, not because I used it too much, but because I used it at all. On my 4th morning, a nurse I had never met came into my room holding a clipboard and said, "Your daughter requested that we keep your phone at the front desk during rest periods." I looked at her name badge. Beverly. Did my daughter also request that I stop breathing during rest periods? Beverly flushed and said it was just for my safety. Safety was the word everyone used when they wanted to take something away. My house was unsafe. My stairs were unsafe. My car was unsafe. My checkbook was unsafe. My memory, according to the intake file Marissa had provided, was inconsistent under stress. That was how she explained my refusal to sign financial documents. She did not say I had balanced my own accounts every month since 1978. She did not say I still remembered the dosage schedule for every hospice patient I had cared for during my final year of work. She did not say I had caught Grant stealing from my emergency fund 2 Christmases ago and pretended to believe him when he called it a misunderstanding. Instead, she painted me in soft, worrying language, confused, anxious, fragile, vulnerable. Those words were more dangerous than insults because they sounded like love to people who were paid not to look too closely. The only person at Silver Pines who looked closely was Naomi Brooks. She was 28, maybe 30, with tired eyes and gentle hands, the kind of nurse who tucked blankets around ankles without making a show of kindness. On my 6th night there, she came in with my evening medication and paused when she saw the book open on my lap. "You read legal thrillers?" she asked. I smiled. "Only when real life gets boring." She glanced at the folder beside me, where I had been copying down every form they brought me, every name, every date, every signature line left blank. A face changed. Not much, but enough. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said quietly. "Do you understand why you're here?" I closed the book. "I understand exactly why I'm here. The question is whether anyone else does." Naomi did not answer. But from then on, she knocked before entering, and she never again spoke to me like a child. Marissa returned on the 15th day with a cashmere scarf around her throat and a leather folder under her arm. Grant followed behind her, carrying 2 coffees, neither of them for me. My daughter kissed the air near my cheek and said, "You look better already." I was sitting in the common room near the fireplace, doing a crossword in pen. Grant glanced at it and frowned, as if mental clarity were an inconvenience. Marissa sat across from me, opened the folder, and slid several pages onto the small table between us. "Mom, we need to finish a few things. Nothing dramatic, just housekeeping." The word made me think of dusting shelves and changing sheets. What she placed in front of me was a durable power of attorney granting her control over my bank accounts, investments, insurance decisions, and any remaining real property interests. I read that phrase twice and looked up. "Remaining?" I asked. Marissa's smile held. "Legal language. You know how lawyers are." I did know how lawyers were. Victor Hale had been one of the best, before he retired to a cedar-shingled house 3 miles from mine and began pretending he cared more about roses than contracts. He had told me exactly what phrase to watch for. Remaining real property interests meant Marissa was not as confident as she wanted me to think. Somewhere, someone had asked a question she could not answer. I placed the paper back on the table. "I won't sign this." Grant exhaled sharply. "For God's sake." "Mom, you're making everything impossible." Marissa reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was cold. "We are trying to protect you. If something happens, we need authority to act quickly." I looked at my daughter's hand, remembering when it had been tiny and sticky with jam. "If something happens," I said, "call my lawyer." Her fingers tightened before she pulled away. That was when Grant lost patience. "Victor Hale is not your lawyer. He's some lonely old man who likes feeling important." Several residents looked over. Marissa whispered, "Grant." But he was already leaning toward me, red-faced and reckless. "You think this is independence? You're in a nursing home." "Mom, you can't drive. You can't manage that house. You can't even remember where you put your pills half the time." I felt the room tilt. Not from fear, but from the old ache of recognition. There it was. The story they needed everyone to believe. I could have corrected him. I could have told the room that he was the one who once called me at midnight because he had mixed painkillers with whiskey after his business loan was denied. Instead, I folded the unsigned document and handed it back. "You should lower your voice." "Grant, lies sound less convincing when you shout them." Marissa stood so quickly, her chair scraped the floor. "You're upset. We'll come back when you're calmer." But she did not leave immediately. She bent close, her perfume sharp and expensive, and spoke into my ear with the sweetness of a knife wrapped in silk. "If you keep resisting, Mom, we'll have no choice but to ask the court for guardianship. Do you understand what that means? It means strangers deciding everything for you. Your money, your treatment, your visitors, maybe even whether certain people are allowed to upset you. Her eyes flicked toward Naomi, who had appeared near the doorway with a tray she no longer seemed interested in carrying. I understood the threat. Stop calling Victor. Stop refusing. Stop making trouble, or they would make my silence official. I looked at Marissa and saw not my little girl, but a woman terrified that the door to my life had not locked properly. That night, Silver Pines tried to take my phone. Beverly came again, this time with an apologetic administrator named Mr. Lowell, who wore soft brown shoes and spoke in softer sentences. Your family is concerned that outside conversations may be increasing your agitation, he said. We want to create a peaceful environment. I laughed once, and the sound startled him. My daughter steals my house. My son calls me incompetent in public, and the phone is what agitates me. Mr. Lowell cleared his throat. No one is stealing anything. Mrs. Whittaker, these transitions are difficult. Transition, another gentle word for a hard thing. Naomi stood behind him, silent but watching. I handed over the phone, because fighting too early wastes strength. But before Beverly locked it away, Naomi's fingers brushed mine, and a small square of paper slid into my palm. A number was written on it in blue ink. Staff line, dial 9, first. I waited until 2 in the morning. Silver Pines slept uneasily. Old buildings hold old fears, even when they are dressed up with crown molding and polished lamps. I walked down the hall in my robe, slow enough for the cameras to see nothing alarming, steady enough to prove what my children denied. At the nurse's station, Naomi looked up from her charting. She did not ask where I was going. She simply pushed the phone toward me and turned her chair slightly, shielding me from the hallway. My hands trembled then, not because I was confused, but because hope is sometimes harder to hold than grief. I dialed 9. Then Victor's number from memory. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep, but instantly alert when he heard me breathe. Eleanor, he said. I closed my eyes. They tried to make me sign today. There was a pause. Then, the quiet click of a lamp turning on somewhere across town. Did you sign anything? Victor asked. No. Did they mention guardianship? Yes. His silence sharpened. I could picture him at his desk. Silver hair, uncombed. Glasses low on his nose. Already reaching for the file he had prepared months ago. Then we move faster, he said. I looked toward the dark window at the end of the hall, where my reflection hovered like a ghost, refusing to leave. Victor, I whispered. Marissa says the house is sold. This time, he gave a soft, humorless laugh. She can say the moon is hers too, saying it doesn't put her name on the deed. Behind me, Naomi pretended not to listen, but her shoulders eased. Victor's voice lowered. I'll come tomorrow. Don't warn them. Don't explain anything. Let them believe they're winning a little longer. I hung up and stood there with my hand on the receiver, feeling the first clean breath I had taken since my children left me in that room. By morning, Marissa had already sent 3 messages to the administrator requesting that my communications be supervised. Grant had left a voicemail saying he was disappointed in my behavior, as if disappointment were a weapon children inherited from their parents and sharpened against them later. At breakfast, I ate oatmeal, while a woman named Ruth told me her son had promised to visit in April. Though she could not remember which year, I reached across the table and touched her hand. For the first time, I wondered how many of us had been placed here, not because we were helpless, but because we had become inconvenient witnesses to other people's greed. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were thinning over the parking lot. Somewhere beyond them, beyond Silver Pines and its locked cabinets and polite lies, Victor Hale was coming with papers my children had never seen, and for the first time since Marissa dropped that box on my bed, I let myself smile. Victor arrived at Silver Pines the next afternoon, looking nothing like the harmless old man my children had dismissed. He wore a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and the kind of expression that made receptionists sit straighter before they knew why. I saw him through the common room window as he stepped out of his black sedan, carrying a leather briefcase I remembered from another lifetime. Victor Hale had once handled waterfront acquisitions for men whose names appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. He had negotiated with developers, judges, bankers, and widows who thought grief meant they had to accept less than they deserved. To Marissa. He was just the retired bachelor who brought me tomatoes from his garden. To Grant. He was a lonely old fool, orbiting their mother. But when Victor walked into Silver Pines and asked for me, Mr. Lowell personally came down from his office, smoothing his tie, as though the building itself had been caught doing something improper. Naomi brought me to the small visitors' room near the library, where Victor was waiting beside a table, arranged with fake flowers and stale sugar cookies. For 1 second, when his eyes found mine, the lawyer disappeared, and the man remained. I saw worry move across his face before he tucked it away. Eleanor, he said, standing. He did not call me sweetheart. He did not fuss over me. He simply held out his hand, as if I were arriving at a meeting, not being rescued from one. That small dignity nearly undid me. I sat across from him and folded my hands. They tried the power of attorney, I said, and guardianship. Victor opened his briefcase. I expected they would. Greed panics when paperwork doesn't obey. Naomi stepped back toward the door. But Victor looked at her and said, "You may want to stay nearby. Miss Brooks, I suspect Mrs. Whitaker, may need a witness more than a nurse today." He laid 3 folders on the table. The first was marked Harbor Lily Holdings. The second contained my medical evaluations from Dr. Samuel Voss. A neurologist, Victor, had insisted I see privately months before. The third held copies of text messages, emails, and notes I had collected while pretending not to notice my children circling my life like gulls around a fishing boat. Seeing all of it there, neat and undeniable, should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it made me tired. A mother never wants proof that her children are capable of betraying her. Proof is heavy. Proof is the death certificate of hope. Victor must have seen that in my face, because his voice softened. "You do not have to enjoy this for it to be necessary." I looked down at the folder with my husband's favorite flower and the company name. Harbor Lily. Thomas used to bring them from the marsh every June, wrapped in damp newspaper. 6 months earlier, I had still been trying to explain away the little things. Marissa asking too many questions about property taxes. Grant joking that oceanfront land was wasted on one old lady and a bunch of hydrangeas. My son-in-law recommending an appraiser he knew through a friend of a friend. I told myself adult children worry strangely. I told myself money made people nervous. Then came the foggy Tuesday night that changed the shape of my family forever. I had gone downstairs for tea and stopped outside the kitchen when I heard Grant's voice. "We just need to get her declared incompetent before she changes the will," he whispered. "Marissa says the old guy next door has been putting ideas in her head." I stood there in my slippers, one hand on the wall, listening to my own son discuss me like a problem to be solved before closing. The next morning, I made coffee, watered the basil, and called Victor. I did not cry until I reached his office. It embarrassed me then, the way grief came out in broken pieces. Victor listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question: "Do you want to punish them? Or do you want to protect yourself?" At the time, I did not know the difference. He taught me, punishment is loud and hungry. Protection is quiet and precise. Over the next weeks, he helped me create Harbor Lily Holdings. Not as a trick, but as a shield. The cottage was sold at fair market value to the company, which was owned by an irrevocable trust with me as the lifetime beneficiary and independent trustees who could not be bullied by my children. I signed every page after 2 separate doctors confirmed I was competent. Victor recorded everything properly. The house left my name before my children realized they needed it there. In the visitor's room, Victor tapped the folder with one finger. The transfer was recorded in Cumberland County. Their attorney should have found it in 10 minutes if they were honest. 20 if they were lazy. I almost laughed. Marissa is many things, but lazy isn't one of them. Then she knew something was wrong, he said, or she suspected and chose to move anyway. That possibility hurt more than ignorance. Ignorance could be blamed on confusion. This was strategy. Naomi appeared quietly at the door and said, "Mrs. Whitaker, your daughter is here." Before I could answer, Marissa's voice cut through the hallway, bright and sharp. "Mother, why wasn't I told you had a visitor?" She entered without knocking, Grant behind her, both of them wearing the expressions of children who had found someone touching a toy they thought belonged to them. Then Marissa saw Victor's briefcase, and her confidence faltered for half a breath. "What is this?" Marissa asked. "A private visit." Victor replied, "Your mother is entitled to those." Grant scoffed. "You need to stop interfering with our family." Victor turned his head slowly, giving my son the full weight of his attention. When a family starts using forged urgency and selective medical language to strip a competent woman of her rights, interference becomes a civic duty. Grant's face reddened. Marissa stepped between them, smiling too hard. "Mr. Harley, I appreciate your concern, but you're making Mom paranoid. She's been under tremendous stress. And frankly, your involvement is confusing her. I watched my daughter build the lie in real time. Brick be brick." Using the same careful voice she used when staging houses for rich buyers. "Move the ugly chair. Hide the crack. Light a candle. Pretend rot is charm." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, tell him you don't need him here." I looked at her hand until she removed it. I asked him to come. Grant let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you did. Because he's filled your head with fantasies that you're some kind of victim." Victor opened the medical folder and slid one page across the table. "Doctor, Voss evaluated your mother in September. No cognitive impairment. Dr. Albright evaluated her independently in October. Summary conclusion. If you file for guardianship using the intake description, you provided Silver Pines. I will make sure the court sees both evaluations and asks why your version differs so dramatically. Marissa went pale beneath her makeup. Grant looked from the paper to me as if I had cheated by remaining myself. You had doctors examine you behind our backs, he said. I met his anger with a calm I had paid for in tears. No. Grant, I had doctors examine me before you could lie about me in front of a judge. That was the moment I saw fear enter my children's eyes for the first time. Not remorse. Not shame. Fear. Marissa snatched her purse from the chair and said, "We're leaving. This conversation is inappropriate." But she did not look at me when she said it. She looked at the folders. Grant lingered long enough to mutter, "You're going to regret choosing him over your own kids." The words should have struck deep. Instead, they landed on scar tissue. I chose you for 40 years. I said, "You chose my house." He flinched, though he tried to hide it, and followed his sister out. Through the half-open door, I heard Marissa whispering urgently into her phone before they even reached the elevator. Victor gathered the papers slowly. "They'll accelerate now," he said. "Yes," I answered, watching the empty doorway. My children had finally understood I was not asleep. Now, they would do something desperate. They did not disappoint. By evening, Daniel Price's development firm had moved the closing date up by 9 days. By morning, Marissa had sent Silver Pines a formal request to restrict my visitors due to emotional manipulation by outside parties. By lunch, Grant had called 3 times, demanding to know whether I had hidden other assets. Naomi showed me the call log with her mouth pressed into a thin line. "I'm sorry," she said. I shook my head. "Don't be. They're not calling because they care what I have. They're calling because they're afraid of what they don't know." That afternoon, Victor returned with another update. Marissa had submitted a seller's affidavit, claiming authority under a power of attorney I had never signed. The signature page was suspiciously blurred in the scanned copy. Daniel Price's company had wired a deposit into an escrow account, and Grant had already asked whether part of it could be released early for property preparation expenses. I sat very still as Victor explained it. There are moments when grief burns hot, and moments when it turns cold enough to make you clear. This was the cold kind. My children were no longer simply trying to take advantage of me. They were committing themselves, signature by signature, to a lie they could not unwind. Victor asked if I wanted him to stop the closing immediately. For a few seconds, I saw Marissa at 7 years old, asleep at the kitchen table, with spelling words under her cheek. I saw Grant at 10, running into the ocean fully clothed, because Thomas dared him. I saw the life before greed entered like damp under a door. Then, I saw the cardboard box on my bed. "No," I said quietly. "Let them walk into the room believing they've won." Victor studied my face, then nodded. And when they do, I picked up the Harbor Lily folder and felt my husband's name, my own name, my future, all still intact beneath my hand. Then we opened the door. The closing took place on the top floor of a glass building in Portland. The kind of office designed to make money feel clean. From the conference room window, the harbor looked almost peaceful. Gray water, moving beneath a sky the color of pewter. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Victor said timing mattered. Let them get comfortable. He told me in the car. Let them hear the numbers. Let them imagine the money already belongs to them. So Naomi drove me in her old blue Subaru, while Victor followed in his sedan with the documents that had waited patiently for this day. I wore my navy dress, the one Thomas loved, because he said it made me look like I knew everyone's secrets. My hands were steady in my lap. That surprised me. For weeks, my children had treated me like a fragile thing. But fragile things do not survive storms. They shatter. I had weathered mine. When I stepped into the reception area, Marissa did not see me at first. Through the frosted glass wall of the conference room, I could make out her silhouette leaning forward, confident and elegant. Her pen already in hand. Grant sat beside her, bouncing one knee under the table. Daniel Price was there too, along with 2 attorneys, a title officer, and a woman from escrow. Everyone had coffee. Everyone had folders. Everyone had the expression people wear when they think the only remaining obstacle is ceremony. Victor came up beside me and offered his arm. Not because I needed help walking, but because he knew entrances have their own language. Naomi stayed a few steps behind us, carrying copies of the Silver Pines intake notes and the visitor restriction request Marissa had sent. The receptionist asked if we had an appointment. Victor smiled without warmth. No, he said. We have an interest. The room went silent when the door opened. Marissa's face changed, first from irritation to disbelief, then to something sharper. Grant pushed back his chair halfway. What the hell is she doing here? He said, as though I were furniture delivered to the wrong address. Daniel Price turned toward Marissa. Mrs. Cole, you told us your mother was medically unable to attend. Marissa recovered quickly. She always did. She is, she said, standing. Mom, this is not appropriate. You shouldn't be here. Mr. Harley, I warned you about upsetting her. I looked at my daughter, at the white blazer she wore like armor, and the diamonds in her ears. I knew she could not afford without borrowing against tomorrow. I'm not upset, I said. I'm curious. Grant laughed under his breath. Curious about what I placed my purse on the table and met his eyes. About how you planned to sell something that was no longer mine to sell. No one moved for 3 seconds. Then everyone moved at once. Daniel Price's attorney reached for the title folder. The escrow woman looked at her screen. Marissa said, That's ridiculous, Grant said. Mom doesn't know what she's talking about. Victor set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and removed the first certified copy. He did it slowly, with the patience of a man who had spent his life letting paper defeat louder people. Recorded transfer. He said, Cumberland County, Registry of Deeds. 6 months ago, the property known as 18 Harbor Lily Road was conveyed by Eleanor Whitaker to Harbor Lily Holdings, LLC, for fair market consideration. Pursuant to an estate protection structure governed by the Whitaker Irrevocable Trust, the title officer took the document. I watched her face as she read. Confusion became focus. Focus became alarm. She turned to Daniel's attorney and said quietly, This is recorded. Marissa sat down, as if her knees had lost the habit of holding her. No, she said. No, that can't be right. We pulled the preliminary title report. Victor looked at her. Then, either the report was incomplete, or someone ignored what it said. Daniel Price's face darkened. Mrs. Cole. My daughter's mouth opened, but nothing polished came out. Grant grabbed the paper from the table and scanned it with frantic eyes, as if legal language might rearrange itself out of respect for his anger. Harbor Lily Holdings. He snapped. That's you. You did this to us? I almost laughed, but sadness got there first. I did this for me. He slammed the paper down. That house was Dad's. The room tightened around his words. I leaned forward. Yes, it was. And your father spent his life making sure I would never be at the mercy of anyone who saw me as an obstacle. Daniel's attorney asked for the seller's affidavit. The title officer slid it across the table. Victor compared it to the unsigned power of attorney Marissa had brought me at Silver Pines. Then, to the blurred copy submitted to escrow. This authorization is invalid. He said, Mrs. Whitaker never signed financial authority to either child. The document used to support this transaction appears altered. Marissa's head snapped up. Careful. Mr. Harley, I am being careful. Victor said. That is why I brought witnesses. Naomi stepped forward then. Her quiet presence, suddenly more powerful than all of Marissa's expensive confidence. She handed over copies of the visitor restriction request. The notes from the day Marissa tried to limit my phone access. And the incident record from Grant's outburst in the common room. Mrs. Whitaker was alert, oriented, and able to refuse consent. Naomi said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. I documented it. Grant turned on her. You're a nurse. Stay out of this. Daniel Price stood before Victor could answer. Mr. Whitaker. Sit down. There was something final in his voice. The sound of a man realizing he had almost bought a lawsuit, disguised as oceanfront property. Grant sat, but his face had gone red to the roots of his hair. Marissa tried one last time to turn the room towards sympathy. Our mother has been influenced. She's lonely, grieving, and vulnerable. We were trying to fund her care. I felt every eye shift to me. Vows that might have made me shrink. But there are humiliations, so complete they burn fear out of you. My care, I said softly. You packed my life into one cardboard box. Told strangers I was unstable. Tried to take my phone, and used papers I did not sign. Do not call that care just because cruelty sounds better in a soft voice. The silence after that was not empty. It was full of things finally becoming visible. Daniel Price removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I want this transaction suspended immediately, he told his attorney, and I want a full review of every representation made by the sellers. Marissa flinched at the word sellers, perhaps because she had enjoyed it when it meant money and hated it when it meant liability. The escrow woman said the deposit would remain frozen pending investigation. Grant shot to his feet. Frozen, no. We need that released. We already used some of it for prep costs. Daniel turned slowly. You used escrowed funds from a sale you had no authority to make. Grant looked to Marissa, but she was staring at the table. For the first time in my life. My children had no mother stepping in to translate their mistakes into accidents. Marissa's mask cracked quietly. Then all at once, you don't understand what you've done. She said to me, I have clients, a reputation, a family. If this becomes public, it ruins me. There it was. Not I hurt you. Not, "I'm sorry." Only the terror of being seen. I looked at the woman who had once climbed into my bed after nightmares and begged me not to leave the light off. I had left lights on for her for years. I had paid tuition, covered overdrafts, babysat during open houses, forgiven insults, disguised as stress. I had mistaken need for love, because mothers are trained to hear hunger and answer it. "Marissa," I said, and her eyes filled at the sound of her name, as if she thought tenderness had arrived to rescue her. "You ruined yourself when you decided I was easier to bury alive than respect." Grant's anger finally collapsed into panic. "Mom, come on. We're your kids." He said it like a password that should unlock every door. For decades, it had. Those 4 words had made me write checks, accept apology, host holidays, ignore lies, and swallow loneliness. But love without boundaries becomes a place where selfish people store their shame. "Yes," I said, "you are my children. That is why I gave you every chance to stop." He shook his head. "You set us up." "No. Grant. I protected my home. You set yourselves up when you tried to sell it." Victor placed another document on the table. Then, the trust clause that removed any beneficiary who attempted fraud. Coercion, or unauthorized transfer of trust property. Marissa read enough to understand. Grant did too. Their inheritance had not simply shrunk by their own actions. It had vanished. The meeting ended not with shouting, but with signatures of a different kind. Daniel Price signed a notice suspending the transaction. The title company filed an internal fraud report. Victor submitted a written demand that all parties preserve communications related to the attempted sale. Marissa left first, walking quickly with her phone pressed to her ear, already trying to manage the disaster as if it were a difficult listing. Grant lingered at the door, looking smaller than I remembered. "Dad would hate this," he said. That one nearly reached me. Then I heard Thomas in my memory. Not angry, just tired, saying the thing he always said. When one of the children broke something and lied about it, don't protect them from the lesson. "Ellie," I picked up my purse. "Your father hated greed," I said, "not consequences." When they were gone, I stayed in the conference room a moment longer. The harbor below reflected a narrow strip of pale light breaking through the clouds. Naomi stood beside me, quiet and fierce. Victor closed his briefcase and asked, "Are you all right?" I looked at the table where my children's dream of stealing my life had come apart one document at a time. I expected triumph. I expected relief. What came instead was grief. Deep and clean, like a wound finally washed. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm free." Victor nodded, and Naomi gently touched my shoulder. As we left the office, no one stopped me. No one supervised my calls. No one asked whether I understood where I was. I understood perfectly. I had walked into that room as the old woman they abandoned. I walked out as the owner of everything they failed to take. The consequences did not arrive like thunder. They arrived like mail. First came the formal notice from the Maine Real Estate Commission, informing Marissa that a complaint had been opened regarding misrepresentation, attempted transfer of property without authority, and possible document alteration. Then came the letter from Daniel Price's attorney, demanding reimbursement of legal costs and warning that his company would cooperate with any investigation into the failed closing. 2 days later, Grant received notice that the escrow funds he had pressured someone to release early were not his to spend. And if they were not returned, the matter would move from civil dispute to something uglier. I did not have to chase them. I did not have to raise my voice. Their own signatures, message, and impatient little shortcuts chased them for me. That was the strange justice of it. When people believe they are smarter than decency, they often leave a beautiful paper trail. Marissa came to Silver Pines 4 days after the closing, though by then I had already packed my things. This time, she did not wear the white blazer. She wore jeans, no lipstick, and eyes swollen from either crying or not sleeping. I was in the lobby with Naomi, waiting for Victor to bring the car around, when my daughter hurried through the glass doors, like someone escaping a storm she had created herself. "Mum," she said, breathless, looking from my suitcase to my coat. "You're leaving." There was a time when that question would have opened a door in me. I would have explained, reassured, softened the moment so she would not feel abandoned. But I had spent enough of my life protecting my children from the discomfort of seeing what they had done. "Yes," I said, "I'm going home." Her face crumpled in a way that looked almost young. I don't have a home to go back to if they suspend my license. The cruelty of that sentence was not in its desperation, but in its focus, even standing in the place where she had left me. My daughter could only see the ruin touching her own doorstep. She followed me into the small sitting area beside the unused fireplace and lowered her voice. "Please don't cooperate with the investigation. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was under stress. I can fix this if you don't make it worse." I looked at the fireplace. At the decorative logs arranged for warmth, no one was allowed to light. "Marissa, I spent your whole childhood fixing things before you had to feel them. Forgotten homework, broken promises, bills you couldn't pay, lies you weren't ready to admit. I thought that was love." She wiped her cheek angrily. "It was love." I turned back to her. "No. It was fear wearing love's clothes. I was afraid if I let you fall, you would stop coming back." Grant arrived before Marissa left, because panic had finally made them a team again. He came through the lobby in a wrinkled sweatshirt, his hair uncombed, phone clutched in his hand. "Tell Price to back off," he said, before greeting me. "He's trying to destroy me over money he can afford to lose." Naomi stiffened beside me, but I touched her wrist lightly. "I wanted to answer this myself. You spent money that was not yours, from a sale you had no right to make." Grant threw up his hands. "Because we thought it was done. We thought you would help your own family." There it was again. That sacred word dragged across the floor. Family. To Grant meant a place where consequences went to die. I studied my son's face and searched for Thomas in it. I found the jaw, the brow, the stubbornness. But Thomas had always taken blame when it belonged to him. Grant had inherited only the shape of him, not the courage. Marissa began crying then. Real tears or useful ones. I could no longer tell. We were drowning. Mom, my mortgage, Grant's loan, the credit cards, everything. You were sitting on that house while we were struggling. Do you know how that felt? I thought of the years after Thomas died, when I worked double shifts and came home with swollen feet, when I sold my mother's bracelet so Marissa could stay in college, when I skipped dental work so Grant could keep playing hockey because he said it was the only thing that made him feel normal. I knew what drowning felt like. I also knew I had never dragged my children under to keep myself afloat. You could have told me you were in trouble, I said. Grant laughed bitterly. So you could lecture us. So I could decide what help looked like. I answered, help is not something you steal, because asking would require humility. For one fragile moment, silence held all three of us like we were back in the old kitchen after Thomas's funeral, when grief made everyone gentle because no one had energy for selfishness. Yet, Marissa whispered, "Are you really cutting us out?" I looked at my daughter, then my son, and felt the ache of every birthday cake, every fever, every school concert, every Christmas morning when I believed love guaranteed loyalty. "I'm not cutting you out of my heart," I said. "I don't know how to do that, even now, but I am cutting you out of my finances, my property, my medical decisions, and my peace." Grant shook his head as if I had become someone unreasonable. "That's cold." I picked up my purse from the chair. "No." Grant, cold was leaving me here with a box and selling my life before I had finished living it. Victor pulled up outside just as Mr. Bloon's. Lowell appeared with my discharge papers. He looked nervous around me now, as if age itself had become legally complicated. I signed where I needed to sign, accepted Naomi's hug, and walked out through the front doors without asking either of my children to carry my suitcase. Marissa followed me to the curb, pleading in low, hurried fragments. Grant stayed behind the lobby glass, either too angry or too ashamed to step outside. The air smelled of salt and thawing earth. Victor opened the car door, but before I got in, I turned to my daughter one last time. There will be investigators. There may be lawyers. I will tell the truth when asked. I will not exaggerate. And I will not protect you from what you chose. Marissa covered her mouth, and for a second, I saw the little girl who used to run to me after nightmares. I loved that little girl. I still did. But I would no longer let the woman she became use that love as a key. Returning to harbor, Lily Road did not feel like victory at first. The cottage stood exactly where I had left it. Gray shingles, weathered by sea wind. Porch rails white against the darkening sky. Hydrangeas sleeping in their winter bones along the path. Yet everything seemed altered because I was altered. Victor carried my suitcase inside and then, without asking, set it beside the bedroom door where Thomas used to leave his muddy boots. I walked through each room slowly. Marissa had taken some things. Grant had boxed others carelessly. There were empty spaces on shelves, pale rectangles on walls where photographs had hung, but the house itself remained. The pantry door frame still held the pencil marks of my children's heights. Thomas's old workbench still smelled faintly of sawdust. In the kitchen, I made tea in the chipped blue mug they had shoved into my box and realized my hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, from the enormous tenderness of being allowed to stay. The investigations unfolded over months. Marissa's license was suspended pending review, and several clients withdrew from active listings once the story reached town in the quiet, merciless way local stories do. Grant sold equipment from his gym to repay part of the escrow funds and took a job managing someone else's fitness center, which I hoped taught him something about humility, though hope had become a careful thing with me. Neither of them went to prison. And despite what angry people online might think, that was never what I wanted. I wanted the theft stopped. I wanted my name cleared. I wanted the world to know I had not been confused, unstably, or helpless. Victor said the trust clause stood firm. They had forfeited their beneficiary rights. The remaining assets would go where I directed. One rainy morning in April, I sat at my kitchen table, signed the amended charitable plan, and gave Harbor Lily Holdings a purpose my children could never sell. By late summer, the cottage had a new brass plaque beside the front door, Harbor Lily House. We did not turn it into an institution. I refused that word. It became a temporary refuge for older adults whose families had made them feel like burdens, bargaining chips, or bank accounts with a pulse. Naomi left Silver Pines and became our first care coordinator. Victor handled the legal clinic twice a month from Thomas's old study, helping people understand powers of attorney, trusts, dates, and the quiet ways love can be counterfeited when money is nearby. Sometimes women sat on my porch and cried because someone finally believed them. Sometimes men stared at the ocean for an hour before admitting their children had taken their keys, then their checkbooks, then their choices. I served tea. I listened. I did not tell them forgiveness was required for healing. I had learned that peace does not always begin with forgiving others. Sometimes it begins with finally refusing to abandon yourself. Marissa sent a letter in October. Not an email, not a text, but a real letter written in blue ink. She said she was in therapy. She said she had spent years confusing success with safety and saw my house as the answer to problems she was ashamed to name. She did not ask for money. That mattered. Grant called at Christmas and left a message saying he hoped I was warm and that he missed Dad. He did not apologize fully, but there was a crack in his voice I recognized as the beginning of something less arrogant than anger. I did not invite them home for the holiday. I was not ready, and perhaps I never would be in the way they wanted, but I placed Marissa's letter in a drawer instead of the fire. And I saved Grant's voicemail instead of deleting it. Boundaries. I discovered I did not make my heart smaller. They simply gave it walls strong enough to remain standing. On the first anniversary of the day, they left me at Silver Pines. I stood on the porch of Harbor Lily House wrapped in Thomas's cardigan, watching the ocean beat silver under the morning sun. Victor came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed me the chipped blue mug. His shoulder brushed mine, and familiar now, in a way that did not demand naming too quickly. "Do you ever miss the way it was?" he asked. I looked toward the pantry door, where the height marks remain, and beyond it, to the rooms now filled with people learning how to breathe again. "I miss who I thought we were," I said, "but I don't miss being blind." Down the path, Naomi was helping an elderly woman plant lilies near the gate. The house was no longer just the place where I had raised my children or lost my illusions. It had become proof that what people try to take from you can still be transformed into shelter. My children put me in a nursing home and sold my house. They didn't know I had already sold it to myself. But the part they understood least was this: I had not done it to win. I had done it so I could finally live.